My name is Maureen A. I'm the chair of Columbia University's Film School at the School of the Arts, and welcome to LenFest. We're very excited for you to be here in the Katarina Otto Bernstein screening room, and we're particularly excited to be able to screen Chasing Coral tonight. Just a little bit of a background. This is the second of a public program that we've started last semester, which combines dialogue between different segments of the university, arts and others, to screen a film together and then approach it from kind of two different sides. And so when I saw Chasing Coral this past fall, October, I knew this would be a perfect film to bring to this program. So thanks for attending. I'm very excited because this film was produced by one of our very recent graduates in the creative producing program, Larissa Rhodes. She graduated only 3.5 years ago and has created this incredible award-winning film, shortlisted for the Academy Award and one of the finalists for Best Documentary PGA, among, I'm sure, many others that I can't go into. So she'll be here after to answer questions, and they'll be coming from myself and also Dr. James W. Porter, who is a professor who is actually one of the stars of the movie. So I have a bit of a crush on him because he's a famous scientist who's in this movie. And he'll be able to kind of approach it from the environmental side. So I'm very excited. Thank you so much for coming. We'll watch the film and then we'll do the Q&A afterwards. Thank you. All right, well, here we are with Larissa Rhodes, producer and star of the movie, Dr. Jim Porter. That was just amazing, really, just extraordinary. It's the third time I've seen it, but the first time I've seen it here. And just, this is still a new venue for the School of the Arts, and just to say that it's a revelation in terms of the visual and the audio in particular, to be able to hear things like that I could never hear anywhere else. So it's really kind of breathtaking.
I wasn't planning to sit through it because I have seen it just a few times, but I sat down just to listen to the sound, and I ended up sitting all the way through. It's just a beautiful theater.
I saw that you were still there. I kept looking over, and I was like, oh, I guess she's enjoying it. So yeah. So I think I'm going to start off with just kind of a general opening question about kind of what was the original premise of the movie. I know it took 3.5 years to make, which is kind of typical for a documentary, especially one of this ambition and size. But what was the kind of initial premise, and then how did that potentially change during the course of making it?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you all for being here, and thank you to Maureen. I don't know if I've told her this, but she is actually the reason I chose to come to Columbia, so thank you.
Did not know that.
But originally the film was actually titled The Underwater Pitch, and we had this idea to follow Richard, who had contacted us, and he had sent us this message and said, you really need to check out what's happening in the ocean. And I had just helped Jeff spend the last 5 years working on a film called Chasing Ice, which was all about climate change and the glaciers. And we thought, well, we know everything there is to know about climate change. We just made this other movie. And he said, really check it out. And we went on a dive, and sure enough, we saw that we had just literally been looking at the tip of the iceberg. And from there, we thought, well, we'll follow this man on this journey. All of the press that had come out about coral bleaching had all come from Richard. He had been really trying to figure out, how do I visualize this problem that's out of sight and out of mind? And partway through the filming, I think we got really lucky. Zach came into the story, and we weren't sort of expecting that at all. He was some sort of employee of the company that we hired to help us make these cameras, and it wasn't until we ended up needing to go to 2 places at one time, and Trevor couldn't be at both places, and he said, well, bring Zach along. And I thought, gosh, I don't know, he's never been out in the field before. Is he going to mess everything up? And one of the cameras ended up flooding, and that was not his fault. But he ended up just becoming so emotional that we found out that of all of the people working on this project, he was the most passionate. And we just kept following him, and really I think that's what made this film possible, is his sort of enthusiasm and excitement for coral, and his love makes me love coral.
I agree. Jim, I think you've got some kind of ability to take us from when this film stopped production to kind of a more of a present moment, and I was wondering if you could kind of share that with this audience, because it's kind of a very special thing that you've brought today.
Thank you. I'd love to do that. And if the audience will indulge me, I would like to show you how your student has inspired me. Can we have the lights down in the first slide, please? So the work that we had been doing, so let's have that first slide. The work that we had been doing for so many years was in the Discovery Bay Marine Lab in Jamaica, where in 1976, next slide please, we had instituted a series of long-term photographs that were demarcated by stainless steel stakes at either point, and I point out that coral with the eye spot there. And in the next picture, what I'd like to show you is what the coral reef looked like in 1976. Next slide, please. This is the magnificent coral reef that we studied way back in 1976. And in the next slide, please, you will see what this reef looks like 10 years later. The devastation is horrific. Next slide, please. And it is mainly the loss of these amazing, iconic branching corals, elkhorn and staghorn. These corals have been so clobbered that our research has put this species on the endangered species list. Once the commonest coral in the Caribbean, now on the endangered species list, and due, in the next slide, please, to this phenomenon of bleaching. We are watching our planet die. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting when the film was finished? What do these places still look like? So I called people at Scripps Institution of Oceanography in their ocean imaging lab, and I said, why don't you come with me and we'll go to Jamaica, bring your camera and your crew. And of course, Stuart Sandin, the director of the lab, said, well, are you sure that you can find them again? And I said, I haven't seen them for 40 years, of course not. He said, we're coming. The reason being that if we were able to find those stations, they would be the oldest georeference stations in existence of coral reefs, and they would be the only georeferenced images of what coral reefs looked like before the fall. Our only photographs of what the Earth looked like. So in this next slide to the movie, please, you will see how this all turned out. We in fact found it. You see the storyboards that we took with us, and there it is, the coral with the eye spot and the stainless steel stake. And so at this point in time, I'm filing on the stake to prove that it's real. No fake news here, okay? And the Scripps team moved into place, demarcated the same areas that we had photographed 40 years ago. And what they do is to move their stereo camera back and forth in a lawnmower pattern across the reef with an intervalometer in the camera taking pictures every 2 seconds to generate hundreds of trillions of data points of XYZ coordinates. And when they turn the corner, you notice the diver turns, the camera doesn't, because we're trying to give the camera and the computer as much referenced, georeferenced information as possible. Here you see the stereo pairs of cameras, and they take pictures, and here is what it looks like. I'm directing the Cray computer to fly across this reef that we had not seen for 40 years with all of its missing elkhorn coral. As we go here, you can see in the upper corner we have scuba weight. I didn't drop that weight. And you also can see the different scales. There's the scuba weight over there. The scales that allow the computer to register where it is in reference to these stainless steel markers. Now we're zooming up on top of this main coral boulder that was the one that held the stake, and what you see in the center there is that is the stake. Now remember, this is not a video. This is a computer-generated graphic of what the coral reef looked like. So we decided, since the elkhorn corals had not been in Jamaica for 20 years, we would begin to move ourselves closer and closer to shallow water stations. And up here in the left, you can see one of the shallow water stations. And as we began to move there, there it was, the first time in 20 years, elkhorn coral had begun to come back. Because this is a hyperspace that you're looking at here, you can actually fly through it, as we will do at the end. But there it is, for the first time in 2 decades, hope had returned to this reef as elkhorn coral is now trying to recover and return to this environment. Could we have the next slide, please? The point is that when there is a good news story in the environment, you have to tell it. And so brilliantly, Larissa, you have told this story. And you have made the science an adventure, as well as the story the adventure, so that hopefully we won't have too many of what you'll see in the next slide here, which is my last slide. So if we could turn the lights back on, please. And I want to do something that this audience surely wants to do. Thank you, Larissa, for what you have done for science and the environment.
Thank you, Jim. That was incredible. Really appreciate that. Just to kind of jump onto the side of the actual making of this film, you know, how many people here have seen Chasing Ice? Anybody has seen it? Okay, wow, wonderful. So Chasing Ice was made several years before this film, and I'd have to say that the complexity, ambition of this film is just exponentially more, even though that one was incredibly hard to make. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the production challenges that maybe are not evident to us in terms of this kind of seamless storytelling that you've created.
Yeah. It really was quite a journey. I started making this film when I was 25 and I was still actually here in school. And I didn't really realize the complexity of the issue at the time. And so when we were thinking, well, we'll just go to one reef and we'll film one thing and then we'll go to the next one and film the next thing, you start to get a sense of, well, this is actually a global issue and how could we possibly manage to capture everything that's happening all around the world. So one of my favorite parts of this project was actually the global call section towards the end, where we realized, well, we aren't equipped to document this around the world. We don't have the number of people or the amount of resources to try to capture this story. And so it was reaching out to this global community, and that actually gave me so much hope because it connected us to all of these people around the world that care just as much as Dr. Porter cares. And they were willing to take their time and their resources and go out to the reefs and document over and over again their own reefs in their backyards, and to be able to communicate with these people who at times, you know, didn't have internet. We were sending them parts that would get stuck in customs for weeks. We were trying to get permits in places that normally you wouldn't be able to get permits, and not just permits but scientific permits, which was a whole other level that I had never dealt with. Being able to film in the Great Barrier Reef was such an honor and a privilege, and it also was the nightmare of all nightmares for production. I think I learned so much about the process of what it means to actually have a safe set, especially underwater. There is unfortunately a filmmaker who passed away recently who had done a number of other ocean documentaries on a dive. We were really lucky never to have had an accident underwater, but it is a really dangerous activity, and we had to have the team go through a ton of rescue certifications and trainings. And when we talked about how we were going to install the cameras, we had to put together all of these proposals of how lift bags would be used to lower things and raise things, and you had to make sure that the chains that you were working with, you know, wouldn't ionize over time and actually affect the reefs. And so all of this chemistry and science that we had incredible experts that helped us with, I think was a production challenge that I had never actually envisioned from the beginning.
Massive.
Yeah, well that leads to a question for the both of you. Scientific data are so difficult to visualize. What were the decisions that led you to do that visualization? And then to Maureen, have you ever thought of offering a course from the film school here or the art department for visualization of science to science majors?
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that was our biggest challenge, because what we learned from Chasing Ice was that while it's great to make a film that can reach the choir, and I consider myself part of the choir, it only goes so far. And so how do we reach beyond the choir? How do we create a film that other people, whether they come from different parts of the country or the world, whether they have different world beliefs, how do we make a film that not only entertains them, but allows them to enter into that story and feel the emotion that I feel every time I see Zach come up from his hardest dive? And so we did a lot of screen testing, and we did testing with very religious organizations. We did testing in places that, you know, politically don't match the beliefs that any of the filmmakers held. And we started talking to them, and we started asking, well, you know, what did you think? And they would say, well, it was a beautiful film, but I don't believe in evolution. And so we thought, okay, well, how did evolution come into it? Oh, well, you know, Ruth said at one point, corals have been around for millions of years. And we thought, well, you know, yes, evolution is something that's very important in the scientific world, but if we only have so much screen time, how can we, you know, create a film that's not going to make people walk out? And so we said, well, what if we just said corals have been around for a really long time? And that seems to work. So I think for us, it was really trying to figure out, you know, how do we communicate to people beyond the choir, and where can we start with that science visualization?
Yeah, I think that goes back to something that we talk about in class, which is, you know, what's best for the project. And so you have to kind of think about that all the time, and you were thinking about that on the kind of ultimate narrative that you wanted to put out and get the most kind of satisfaction on that. Jim and I are going to ask a couple more questions, and we're going to open it up to the audience. I just wanted to say that. One of the things that Columbia University, particularly the film program, is known for is being the story school. We really, really teach, and in our DNA is how to tell good narratives, no matter what form. And though we only have one documentary producing class, which I don't even teach, we actually have, you know, many of our graduates have gone on to do narrative, but also nonfiction. And so I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, you know, what was it that you learned at Columbia, particularly regarding narrative structure? Because it was very clear to me that you felt like contributed to this. I felt like I saw things like setting up the problem, setting up the obstacles, then how are you going to overcome those obstacles, then setting up the stakes, then raising the stakes when there's that fail with the camera, and then you kind of have to go back, and it's just that hero's journey. And then how do you end a film like this without having the viewer want to kind of blow their brains out because it's so depressing, right? So these were the things that I was just so in awe of with the filmmakers, to be able to create such a compelling narrative throughout. And with nonfiction, it's even more difficult because it's all kind of changing.
That's a great question. I think at the beginning, like Maureen was saying, you don't really know where the story is going to go. But we wanted to envision, you know, what were we going to film, because that would dictate, well, what's our budget going to be, or what's our timeline going to be. And so we sort of envisioned what we thought maybe the film would be, and of course it never ends up that way. But we did sort of meet, and we sort of used, you know, Aristotle and the 3 acts to sort of arc out, well, what is Richard's quest? What is he trying to do? He's trying to reveal the corals to the world, and if that's the quest, how do we create scenes, and how do we use science to help us tell that story? And so at every moment we would ask, when we were in the edit process, how is the scene either moving the action forward or developing a character? And in some places it's fine to just develop a character. I could sit with Ruth Gates forever and hear her talk about coral polyps, which I didn't know was an animal before starting on this project. And at the same time, not wanting to leave people at the end feeling completely hopeless. We tried to figure out, you know, we had a character that sort of came out of left field, and so how would we bridge that? And I think that was our biggest struggle. I think Columbia really focuses on story, and they say like story is king, and I like to say story is queen. But it is so much the heart of what it is, and without Zach and without his passion and without his story arc, I don't think the film would have been nearly half as interesting. And that's not to say that Richard's quest wasn't interesting, it's that the two of them together brought very different things to the story. And so for us, it really was in the edit process where we started to say, well, what did we actually capture, and how do we arrange it in a way where we start to see what the problem is at the beginning, so that by the time you get to the end, we don't have to tell you, oh, seeing the fuzzy parts of the coral is bad. You already know what coral bleaching is, what death looks like, and so you can just watch it.
Beautiful. Jim?
So I'm curious, when you were interviewing me, you were asking really good questions. So the question to you is, how as a filmmaker did you prepare for the science part of the film?
It's really hard to be asked that by you. Yeah, it is, I think, the most challenging part of films like this, because I was not an expert
I didn't know that.
in coral or science in general. I think one of the things that our team is really passionate about is trying to understand what it is that we're documenting. And so for us, we went on this quest, and just like Zach or Richard or any of the people in the film, they were learning just like we were learning. And every time they would understand something, we would talk to them, and they would spit back at us what they had just understood. And it would take multiple times for us to understand, you know, that analogy doesn't make sense to me. Can you explain it another way? And so I think a lot of it was just us asking you, can you explain it another way? Can you explain it so a 5-year-old would understand it? Because I am a 5-year-old at times when it comes to science. And I think we all got a crash course in biology. And I think for us, it was really quite a privilege to be able to talk to these scientists in the film. They've become more than scientists, they've become friends to us. And at Sundance, we had the extreme honor to be able to premiere the film there, and all of the cast, all of the scientists, even Charlie from Australia came out. They actually came in flip-flops. We had to buy them boots because they had never been in the snow. And they got a standing ovation at the end of the film, the scientists. And for me, that was the most magical part of anything, because it is their work. They've been doing this for years, longer than I probably even existed. And this, I think, allows their work to be elevated.
I agree. Beautifully said. Let's open it up to questions from the audience. So, yes.
Just curious, how are you able to finance a film project that continues for 3 years?
We have a microphone.
Oh, sorry. How are you able to finance a film project that goes on for 3 years?
Yeah, it's difficult. I think we were lucky in that the director had a track record, and so that allowed us to get a bit of development funds so that we could start to explore what would a story look like. And then we had a lot of help. We did a pitching forum here in New York called Good Pitch. We got to participate in a Sundance program. And those, I think, really helped catapult this film into existence. There's a lot of passionate people that care about the issue, and a lot of passionate people that care about filmmaking. And so while we did receive a couple of grants, the majority of it was financed through private support.
And as Larissa knows, I don't believe in luck when it comes to film production. It's just hard, bloody work. So, yes, up at the top there.
Hi, I'm curious. I didn't realize that bleaching is as bad as it is, because I don't know if the Times has covered it particularly. Having said that, I understand that there are attempts to replant coral, and I kind of wondered why you didn't have something about that in your film. But you see, I've only really been interested in reefs for about the last 3 years, and now I have kind of an understanding where my interest lies historically. Not so great. So could you?
The reason the replanting hasn't been covered is that it doesn't work. However, Ruth Gates has in her laboratory an experimental system where they are upping the temperature just a little bit, to see which corals survive. So here we have the problem. On the next film, you're going to have to explain natural selection and evolution.
And I think when Dr. Porter says that it doesn't work, that you can physically replant a coral, but it would be like saying you're going to go into the rainforest, you're going to clear cut all the trees and then plant aspens. So
You understand what I'm saying. I've actually read about replanting coral.
yeah.
They do it, and if the water's
But I understand what
good.
you're saying, so that's all very clear. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, yes.
We don't need to
But
discuss
one out there.
anything beyond that. I need to know.
So coming from the perspective of, like you said, you asked all these scientists these questions about like, well, what is a polyp and like what is the animal, and trying to understand it, and then working on that translation of how do I take what these scientists are saying and making that accessible to a general audience. So from the perspective of like working, doing research to reduce atmospheric CO2 and things like that, it's constantly this challenge of like, how do we make this accessible to people? So I wonder if you have any wisdom as to that, of is it showing people visual things, or is it following a story that or the analogies that really makes people get it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We spent a lot of time thinking about how do we answer that question. And I think when Chasing Ice first came out, Jeff made a film, it got into Sundance, and he thought, I've won the lottery. And then it won an award, and it went on to many other festivals, and he thought, job well done. And then people started asking, well, what can I do? And we didn't have an answer for that. And so we kept thinking, well, what can this film do? And we saw this amazing power for film to be a tool that can help shift people's beliefs. And so we took that film to a district in Ohio where we heard that the congressman didn't publicly believe in climate change, and at the same time there was a groundswell of people in the community that actually supported the environment. And so we screened the film, and we screened the film, and we screened the film, and a couple weeks in, the congressman called us because after each of the screenings we asked people to write on a sign, Dear Congressman T-Berry, and then we let them write whatever their message was, and then we hashtagged the congressman and posted those online. And their team asked, how long are you going to be here? And after 6 weeks, he publicly came out and he changed his stance on climate change. Now, he wasn't voting that way, but I think what he saw was this wasn't the tree huggers and the 350.orgs, and we love those people, but these were, farmers. These were conservative members of his, demographic, and he saw that this isn't just a single one-sided issue, that my citizens care about this. And so I think we're employing the same thing with Chasing Coral, is how do we bring this film to a place now where people can find it to be accepting? And I think for us, we're doing a lot of work actually where Dr. Porter is working in Georgia and South Carolina, because we really feel like there's an opportune moment for people to see that solar is a solution. They get a lot of sunshine. They've been ravaged by a hurricane recently. There's all of these reasons that allow people to empathize, but more than anything, it's a trusted messenger. And for us, it may be a film, but for other people, it may be the quarterback of a football team. It may be the priest in a church. It may be a teacher. And so we're really trying to figure out who in the community do people trust, and how do we bring them into the story so they can take everybody else along the ride.
I have to jump in here. You couldn't possibly know this, but I grew up in T-Berry's district. I'm an Ohioan. And what you did is amazing.
I realized, Jim, that I didn't answer your question before about visual statistics and graphics and visualness. I think it's a great idea. I mean, one of the things that was exciting about the beginning of the build out of the Manhattanville campus here for Columbia was the fact that the School of the Arts has this building right next to the Mind Brain Behavior building, which is the other one on the corner, and the kind of abilities to use those buildings and the communities housed in both of those as a way of creating synergies. So I think I'm going to think a little bit more about your idea and how is it that that could be explored. So
We need help.
yeah, no, completely. I mean, it really, it's really all about storytelling, and that's really where it all comes from. And your question was speaking to that, and how much of it is emotional, and how much is visual and audio and all of that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You mentioned in the slide portion at the end that that one of the corals is coming back in Jamaica,
Yeah.
but the temperature of the world continues to rise. So I'm wondering how that is.
It's not a uniform distribution of temperature everywhere, but the important point is, and the hopeful point of the movie is, that there are things we can do. For instance, if we were to implement the Paris Climate Accord, we could lower the temperature enough to buy coral reefs 100 years more, within which time we could learn to use solar. So it's not hopeless, and there are reefs that can come back, and we just need to provide them a planet on which they can do that.
And just to echo what Dr. Porter said, for us, we're very optimistic people, obviously, because we didn't end the film where we could have, which is just that corals are on the track to die. We really, really believe that there is a lot of hope and that there is actually a lot of action that we all need to take. And for each of us, it's very different. And so we consciously didn't put a call to action at the end of the film, because each one of us has a different take. Each one of us is coming from a different place. I can't ask you to put solar on your roof if you're living in an apartment building that you don't own. And similarly, I can't go to Boulder, my hometown, and ask people not to use plastic water bottles because they would laugh at me, because nobody uses plastic water bottles in the town. It was really trying to figure out, how do we let the story speak for itself, and how do we show people that actually, even if it isn't about corals, it wasn't about ice. This is about ecosystems. This is much bigger than even the corals. It is our human world that we depend on. And so even if we lose coral reefs or we lose the glaciers, there are so many other ecosystems that are at risk, that if we don't take action, like Jim is saying, we are risking everything. And I think for us, that really gives us hope, because we haven't lost yet. There's still time. And even though our administration may not be part of the climate accord, cities across the US have committed to being renewable. New York is one of those cities by 2030. So there's a lot that we're doing, but we still need to do a lot more.
There's a gentleman there with the microphone.
Yes, my question is more for Dr. Porter. I was wondering if, given recent developments in genetic engineering technology with CRISPR-Cas9, whether there are any efforts currently to try and genetically engineer coral species to be able to, more of like a last-ditch effort to have better resilience to those warming spikes. Like in the film, we saw that some of the corals were phosphorescing. It was called, like, essentially creating sort of like a heat screen to try and protect the corals. Are there any efforts to try and make corals better able to do that?
Yes, excellent question. You realize this film was made before CRISPR. That's how current that is. And you're absolutely right. That is exactly what we're doing now, because there are some places around the globe where the water temperature is warmer. Shark Bay in Western Australia routinely has temperatures higher, and there are corals there. And can we snip out the genes from those successful warm water species and introduce them into others and then replant them on the barrier reef? That is being considered. That is a source of hopefulness. Thank you. Maybe that's your doctoral dissertation.
Well done. Sir, right here.
First, Dr. Ryan, I want to compliment you. It's my first time up here on the screen, the resolution, the sound, which is magnificent, as is this film. I've just come back from being home at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, and I was Gregory Bateson's last assistant there. And I want you to know that Gregory would have loved this piece of work, and he would have also been deeply moved by it, as am I. He was working much of his life in the oceans with his wife, Margaret Mead, in Papua New Guinea and Bali in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And he died in Big Sur, where we have a 90-mile marine mammal preserve stretching from Monterey Bay to San Simeon. We've always been told that our giant sequoias, the redwoods, are the largest living things on Earth, but they're tiny compared to the reefs. And we're always told that they're the oldest living things, between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. So my question, Dr. Porter, is how old are the reefs? I imagine they're far older than our trees.
Well, they have 500 million years of continuous evolution and existence, and some corals are more than 10,000 years old by the cores that you saw being sliced up there. And so yeah, those of us who are marine-centric have always somewhat worried about the puny terrestrial biodiversity.
I also want to just say that I don't take any credit for the building of this building, but I do want to share credit to the men and women who staff this building, and that half of it is the technology and the other half is the people who know how to use that technology. And so to have such a beautiful projection and to have all the support that we have here every time we do a screening, I'm incredibly grateful. So thank you. We have somebody up at the top there. Sorry. Oh, okay. This woman here. Thank you.
One quick question about the science. Are reefs only affected by, would that be called surface temperature of the ocean rather than sort of, the heat sink provided by the deep oceans?
Well, the ocean is warming from the surface down,
Yeah.
but it's going all the way. But that's a really good question, because one theory is that maybe deep reefs, which can be up to 300 feet in depth, might be the refugia that, because of their cooler temperatures, might eventually repopulate the shallow water if we, human beings, can get ourselves under control.
I think we have time for maybe one or two questions from the audience, and then I have one or two just to finish up. Yes. Up there.
So this question is for Larissa. With chasing ice and chasing coral, it seems like you have a bit of a series. Are you working on anything now?
That's a nice question.
Great, that was going to be one of my last questions, so you took it. Thank you.
I feel like we've been chasing a lot and we're ready to catch up, honestly. There's lots of topics out there and I think we're exploring them all. I think for me what's most fascinating though is actually how do we communicate science, and so whether it's another chasing film or something beyond that, just exploring our world and just trying to understand and bring things to life that maybe you wouldn't get to see otherwise. But I'm still working a lot on the impact for this film.
And while we're talking about kind of next projects, Jim, is there anything you want to share in terms of what your next project or projects is? I know you're spending a lot of time touring the country in support of this film and doing a lot of outreach, but anything else?
Well, we actually applied for a grant to go back to Jamaica, and we got those funds. So we are going back there, and we are hoping to make that reef one of Richard Beaver's 50 reefs. Now you may say, well, there are thousands of reefs. Why 50? 50 are baby steps. That's right. They're baby steps. Take them.
Great. I think we have one more question if anybody has one. Yes, this woman in the middle.
It's kind of broad, but how do scientists keep on keeping on in this political environment of anti-science and decreased funding and everything going on with this administration?
That's actually an easier question to answer than you might realize, because most scientists are teachers, and you cannot be a cynic and be a teacher. And so my optimism is sitting here to my left. It is the young people of this country, and that's the hope.
I just wanted to ask something about the virtual reality footage. So this film premiered at Sundance in January 2017, and I didn't get a chance to see the world premiere then of the feature film, but I got a chance to see in the VR, the virtual reality room that they had, footage from your cameras. We have a digital storytelling lab here at the film program, School of the Arts, which is all dealing with new kind of technology, so augmented reality, AI. We just had something at Sundance called Frankenstein AI, and virtual reality. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that technology, your experience of it, and if it does add a different dimension to some of the things we were talking about tonight.
Yeah, we started filming a virtual reality project while Zach was on Keppel Island. and Lizard Island, because they had all of this time in between doing all of these dives. And what we found is it became this really immersive thing, and we didn't really realize its power until Zach took it to, that's actually his mom's classroom. She's a teacher, and these kids live in the middle of Colorado, and at the time probably none of them had been scuba diving, and many of them hadn't been to the ocean at all. And to see the power of visual storytelling in a way that they could experience was totally different than showing them a clip. And so for us, I think that was the exciting part, is how do you bring a story literally alive in front of somebody's eyes? And that, I think, is the power of virtual reality, and I think we're still getting there. I wouldn't say, our virtual reality film that's a companion piece to Chasing Coral is the end-all be-all underwater experience, but it was a step, and for us it was a really exciting use of technology, and I think it's only going to get better.
Great. So let's finish up with just, is there an ask from you, Jim, and from you, Larissa, to the audience, or something that you want to impart as we finish up?
I'll say the same thing to you that I said to every Sundance audience, and they took us down to Salt Lake City to speak to high school students, and they asked the same thing: what is the one thing we can do? And that is a one-word answer: vote.
I mean, there's so many different things that you can do, and we have a website that you can visit that's full of them, and I'm happy to talk to any of you afterwards. I think for me, because this is film and this is where my film journey kind of began, I think storytelling has this incredible power to captivate people and to change the way that they think and feel. And so for me, it's just, how do you tell those stories, whether it's through film or just in your daily life? How do you open up and talk to people who may not communicate well with you, or you may not see eye to eye? But through storytelling, I think it's much easier to bring people together. So I hope you all tell some good stories.
I think for me, the takeaway, one of the takeaways from this film was, I think it was Zach who talked about the kind of power and the awesomeness of symbiosis, the anemone,
Yes.
and the clownfish, and how those two need each other. And I think that this film powerfully demonstrates the importance of we need each other. So with that, thank you both, Larissa Rhodes and Dr. Porter, for coming tonight and showing us this incredible film.
Thank you.